Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast here on a Monday, the Hey Mary Kay edition of the podcast, doing things a little bit differently. Today, we're actually going to divide this up into two parts with the playoffs this weekend. And then, of course, the holiday. We decided to just take this podcast, divide it up into two. So you're going to get two Hey MKs coming up here today. And then probably about midday tomorrow on Tuesday, part two will post. So these questions came from our Football Insider subscribers. And let's get right to it, Mary Kay. As you can imagine, there are a lot of questions about the defensive coordinator. I thought this was actually an interesting angle on it, though. Deshaun Watson at quarterback and how it affects the defense. So this comes from Wes Daniels in Greensboro, North Carolina. Hey, Mary Kay. How does having Deshaun Watson at quarterback shift what is needed on the defensive side of the ball? Are there scheme adjustments or different philosophies needed now that the offense is going to be shaped more around Watson's talent? And I kind of assume the meaning here is it's a little more high-powered, maybe a little faster-paced, maybe a little more pass-heavy. How does that affect the defense?
It's a really good question. I have thought about the defensive coordinators, some of them at least, in terms of how connected they might be to Deshaun. How, do they know him? Do they not? Because so much of what this team is all about now is going to center around Deshaun Watson. So I do think that the hiring of the defensive coordinator will be something that has some part of Deshaun connected to it in some way. But in terms of schematically, I don't know that it matters much if you play a defense that blitzes a lot, or if you play a 3-4 as opposed to a 4-3 or a wide 9 or any of those kinds of things. I don't think it's really that as much as it is, culture fit and, just personality fit within the organization. I think they have to get all that right. I think they need someone who is a good teacher, someone who brings a lot of passion to the job, someone who can pull together what I think is kind of a splintered defense right now. And they have some really intriguing candidates. Out of all the four candidates, and we're talking about Jim Schwartz, we're talking about Sean Desai, who, as we tape this, is actually interviewing right now in Berea. We are talking about Brian Flores. And we are talking about Denard Wilson, the current defensive passing game coordinator of the Eagles. So they've got some really good candidates. Only two of them have coordinator experience per se. Two of them have held the job of coordinator. Now, Brian Flores did have that job of calling the defensive plays in his last season in New England before he took over as head coach of the Dolphins, but he didn't actually have the title, curiously. So, they don't have anybody except for Jim Schwartz, who has been a defensive coordinator for a long period of time. But they've got some young guys. They've got one older guy in Jim Schwartz. They've got two guys that have been head coaches before. So it's kind of a good mix, a good cross-section of candidates. In terms of knowing Deshaun, one connection that we know for sure is Brian Flores. The Dolphins tried to trade for Deshaun Watson, and I was told that Deshaun really liked Brian Flores and wanted to pair with him. So I think that's one thing to kind of keep an eye on as we go throughout the process. But other than that, I don't think from a schematic standpoint that it matters too much what kind of a defense you play.
Okay, so let's get into these coordinators then. And this comes from Jordan in Wakeman, Ohio. Hey, Mary Kay, what defensive coordinator do you think is likely to come to Cleveland and stay? Well, he puts a big window of years on this. Stay for the next 5 to 10 years. That's you'd be pretty fortunate to have a good coordinator for 5 to 10 years. But which of these guys do you look at and see as maybe a long-term option at that position?
Yeah, you're right about the fact that, if the coordinator is that good, he's not going to last 5 years. It's just not going to happen like that. And teams recognize that. And I do think it is a little bit of a consideration when they are hiring this particular coordinator to ask themselves, is he going to be around more than a year? Because I mean, if you hire Brian Flores and he has a good year, there's a chance he isn't going to be around after that 1 year. If you hire a younger guy like a Denard Wilson, chances are that he will be around for a couple of years because, 1 year as a coordinator probably isn't going to be enough for him to necessarily prove himself and become that hot head coaching candidate. Sean Desai is a pretty intriguing prospect. I've been doing a little bit more due diligence on him today. He's very, very smart. Players really like him. He's got a lot of teaching in his background. He's got a doctorate. There are a lot of cool things about him. He's been a coordinator. He spent 1 year as coordinator of the Bears, so he's got that experience. Nobody seems to be clamoring for him as a head coaching candidate this year. So I think he does need to get back into the job and reestablish himself as a coordinator. So I think you could probably get away with all of them sticking around for more than 1 year, except for maybe Brian Flores. Jim Schwartz doesn't really have head coaching aspirations, I don't think, at this point in his career. Desai and Wilson might be, a couple years out from really people coming after them as that head coaching candidate. So Brian Flores, he's been head coach before, trying to rehabilitate his career and get himself back on track. He's probably someone that you would have to worry about losing after one season.
And, this is something I feel like Browns fans worry a lot about. I know when this team went to the playoffs, we got a lot of questions about this, assistants leaving and all of that. But that's just kind of the cost of being good. And that's a really good problem to have. You're not seeing Browns assistants on these lists of coaching and coordinator candidates right now. And it's because the team wasn't very good and they were disappointing. So it's a good problem to have if your team is good and you have assistants that are getting job interviews. What you need to be able to do is, build up behind them so that you have a situation where, Brian Dable gets hired away by the Giants and you've got Ken Dorsey, ready to step in and call plays. You just have to plan for it and kind of know what you're looking for.
Yeah, your coaching staff has to be very deep and strong. And those young guys that you hire, you have to see something, or those young females that you hire, you have to see something in them that tells you they have the potential to be position coaches and then coordinators and head coaches, because they're probably going to move up the ranks very quickly if you are a good regime. And that's what Bill Belichick has had to do all of these years. He's had to keep kind of funneling them through. But if you get the right kind of guys, you get the right kind of guys or females in there, then they're going to be able to adapt to their new roles very quickly and take over for the person that was in front of them without needing 5 years to learn the role. So that's what the Browns are probably going to have to do. They're going to have to make sure that they've got 3 or 4 other people on their staff. Now, unfortunately for them, they didn't seem to feel they had that person to come in here and replace Joe Woods. Now, this was different. This wasn't he left and took a coordinator job somewhere else or a head coach job somewhere else. They fired him. So this has a little bit of a different spin on it. But still, you would almost think that somebody on that staff would have warranted a defensive coordinator interview. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that not one of them got one. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I just think that they should have had 4 or 5 other guys on the staff that could interview for that job. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that they aren't even interviewing somebody. I found that very intriguing, and I actually wonder if maybe that's part of why they didn't fire Joe Woods in the middle of the season. Like they didn't think any of those guys were ready to take on that role, which again is surprising because I think there are some guys, like Chris Kiffin or Jason Tarver or someone like that who could have. I mean, I think Tarver's been a coordinator before even. Like there seems like there's guys that at least could have taken over on an interim basis, or at least could have just merited an interview, if nothing else.
Yeah, so I think they have to be cognizant of that. I think they have to be making sure that they stock their staff, because over the next 4 or 5 years, they plan to do a lot of winning. And if it goes the way they plan, they're not going to be keeping some of their best coaches. So hopefully for them, they'll get it right with this defensive hire. I think it's really, really important. It really is vitally important to get this right. And then they have to make sure that either he's bringing on some guys that he really likes and sees some things in, or they have to help him with that. But you have to have a stable of good quality coaches coming up through the pipeline.
All right, our next question. This comes from, I don't know if I have a name. Oh, here we go. Brian from Brian from Minnesota, one of our regulars here. He's got a question about Kevin Stefanski and the attractiveness of this role. So, hey, Mary Kay, how attractive is this role if defensive coordinator candidates look at it and see Kevin on perhaps a short leash?
Yeah, I mean, it's another very, very good question. And in fact, I asked Deshaun Watson that on his, getaway day press conference, how do you feel about the stability of the coaching staff here? And he was, of course, very, very positive about it. He is very high on Kevin Stefanski. But I think it is something that a young coach has to think about because, if you're going to come here, you're going to take a risk. You're going to maybe give up other opportunities. You're going to, in some cases, move your young children here and enroll them in schools and bring your wife or your husband or whatever. I keep saying the only candidates right now are men, so I guess I can keep it to that. But you move your kids, your family, your wife here, and then you do have to think about, is this going to be a long-term proposition? So the person who takes the job is going to have to know that. I mean, it's the business. It doesn't really matter for the most part where you go, unless you're going to New England, or maybe if you're going to Pittsburgh to work under Mike Tomlin, that you have some really great job security there. Again, you have some great job security in New England, but in most places, on most teams, you really don't. And you never know what can happen from year to year. You can go from coach of the year to on your way out in a hurry. So I do think it's a consideration for these guys. Now, I do think it is an attractive job from the standpoint that they do have a lot of good young talent, and they have the money and the desire to add to this defense. So, they're going to go out and they're going to get a defensive end to replace Jadeveon Clowney. They really have to do that. And then they have to get a defensive tackle, a really good defensive tackle, either in free agency or in the draft or in a trade or whatnot. So I think you can feel good about some of the really, up and coming young guys that you have. You can look at this roster and you can point to JOK and Greg Newsome and Grant Delpit and Martin Emerson. Perion Winfrey needs to keep maturing, but, he is exhibiting some signs of being able to contribute in a big way inside there. So I think it's an attractive job from a talent standpoint, but from a stability standpoint, there are no guarantees almost anywhere in this NFL.
Yeah, I think that's really the gist of it. Like this, there's 32 of these jobs. There's 32 defensive coordinator jobs, and if you get an opportunity to take one, especially if you're a young guy, like if you're Brian Flores, you can wait. If you kind of look at this situation, you're like, I don't know if I want to be a part of this. You can wait and you'll find another job, maybe even a head coaching job someplace else. But if you're a young guy climbing the ladder and you get that opportunity, you've got to take it. I mean, look in Denver. Their defensive coordinator is getting head coaching interviews, and their head coach got fired. So you can excel in a situation where things maybe aren't ideal. You don't have to go somewhere where you're going to be there for 4 or 5 years. You just have to go there and show that you can do the job and do it well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is the name of the game. I mean, look at Sean Desai only lasted 1 year at as coordinator for the Bears before Matt Nagy got fired, and then he had to find new work. So, they took him on in Seattle, made him an associate head coach, defensive assistant, and now here he is back out on the circuit, getting a defensive coordinator opportunity with the Cleveland Browns. So I do think that, you just kind of have to dive in and you have to take these chances knowing what the NFL what the NFL is about. What have you done for me lately? How many games have you won lately? So I think they all understand and know that. I mean, if you've got 5 opportunities, sure, you can pick the best one, but it's not always like that.
DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is officially live. Now you can legally bet on all your favorite sports anytime and anywhere right here in Ohio with DraftKings. For a limited time, new customers who sign up with promo code OBTALK and bet $5 or more will receive $200 in bonus bets instantly. DraftKings has the best features, including same-game parlays, player props, and more, with fast and easy payouts right at your fingertips. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers can use promo code OBTALK to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you place a $5 bet on anything. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook with the code OBTALK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, 21 plus, physically present in Ohio. Valid one offer per first-time depositors who have not already redeemed $200 in free bets via pre-launch offer. Minimum $5 deposit and wager, $200 issued as bonus bets. Eligibility restrictions apply. See dkng.co/OH for terms. Okay, a question about the run defense. This comes from, doesn't look like we have a name here. Hey, Mary Kay. I, along with many Browns fans, were extremely frustrated with the Browns' lack of a run defense. And then this person watched the Bengals-Ravens game last night. While the Barry DePodesta regime might have been justified in their approach when looking at the NFL as a whole, how does a team in the AFC North, a team that has to face Pittsburgh and Baltimore twice a year, not invest heavily in stopping the run? Oh, here we go. There's a name buried in here. It's Rich, an Akron native and a 33-year New York City resident. And most importantly, a loyal cleveland.com sports reader.
All right. Thank you, Rich. So, it's a good question. And I think what happened was, I think Andrew Berry and the personnel department felt that they had addressed the defensive tackle position enough to make improvement over last year. They signed Taven Bryan, who had some experience as a defensive tackle. They drafted Perion Winfrey in the 4th round, thinking that he was going to be able to contribute early on, not realizing that he needed to mature way more than they anticipated. So it took him a long time. He wasn't able to be just plugged right in there and make an impact right away like they thought he would. And then from a linebacker standpoint, they thought that they were pretty well set at linebacker with, Anthony Walker starting in there in the middle, and then JOK, coming out and having a better second season. Jacob Phillips, they were excited about him. Wherever he ended up on the field, weak side, middle, whatever the case may be. I'm sure they thought, they were real solid with Sione Takitaki there as well. And they just felt like they were going to be okay. And as the season went along, many of those things just kind of fell through. Obviously, the defensive Jordan Elliott was another one where we heard all offseason how great Jordan Elliott was going to be. And this was his first full season as a starter, and it just doesn't always happen the way that you want it to. He needed time. Now, in his second full season next year as a starter, he might grade out really well and be a much better defensive tackle. But the learning curve was much greater than they thought it was going to be. So you put all of these things into the hopper, and it just didn't work out. It just didn't go well. Then you add into the mix, and I think this is very key. You add into the mix that your best edge setter in Jadeveon Clowney just wasn't on board with the program all season long. He was not on board. And so not only did he take himself off the field for most of the game in Baltimore, 23-20 loss in October, but then he was benched for the first part of the next game. And obviously he was just not that into it and did not put his heart and soul into stopping the run. And I think that you add all of those things up, and it was kind of a recipe for a really bad run defense.
Yeah, I guess the proof will be in the pudding as we move forward. Are they going to address this differently this year? Last year, it was just they're going to rely on, hey, we really like Jordan Elliott. We're going to let him see what he can do. we're going to take a flyer on Taven Bryan. He was a former first-round pick. They didn't invest a ton in the position necessarily, but they seemed to like what they had. So, and it just didn't work. So it's either going to be like, hey, we tried last year and it just didn't work, so we're going to try something different. Or, if they run it back, that's a concern. If they kind of say, we're going to do the same thing again and kind of cross our fingers and see what happens, that's a problem. But if they go out this offseason and they fix it, then I guess it's almost like a footnote what happened this past season.
Yeah, they can't run it back. I mean, we know they can't run it back. They've got to upgrade their run defense in some way, or they'll get themselves run out of town. So they absolutely have to do that, and they know that they have to do that. I don't think it's anything that anybody has to, beat them over the head with by any stretch of the imagination. They can see what's going on, and they can see that. I mean, if 3 or 4 of those things had happened differently, if Jordan Elliott lives up to expectations, if Perrion Winfrey comes in and contributes, if Jadeveon Clowney, just doesn't kind of give up on the whole program, and if Anthony Walker doesn't get hurt, I mean, it's a whole different run defense. And then they lost more linebackers after that, of course, Jacob Phillips, JOK, and on and on. So, but they still have to address it. And I think the way they need to address it again is a number 2 edge that can set the edge, a really good premier defensive tackle, which I would spend money on and make a priority in the offseason. I don't know if Daron Payne will make it to free agency, but he's the guy that I would go for and target number 1 overall and jump all over that from the Commanders. But yeah, they cannot run it back. That's not going to happen, and they have to address it in a significant way.
Yeah, and I think one of the big problems was, you mentioned those ifs, right? If this happens, then it's different. And I just think when, kind of hearing those, you sort of want, okay, if Jadeveon Clowney is better, well, you kind of know, you kind of know what you're getting into with Jadeveon Clowney. So it was a risk to bring him back for a second year. Mm-hmm. You just sort of know that's been his history. If Jordan Elliott is this, and that's fair, let your guy develop, but we hadn't seen it from Jordan Elliott yet. A lot of those ifs certainly could have worked out. Mm-hmm. If Perrion Winfrey comes in and contributes, but then at the same time he fell to the 4th round. Right. They just relied too much, I think, on some of those ifs that if you really looked at it, you kind of saw the odds are sort of more in the favor of those ifs not working out. And unfortunately, they all just kind of didn't work out. They didn't even get one lucky break go their way.
I know. I mean, when you think about it, yeah, like you said, not one of them worked out the way that they hoped. Even if you just had been able to keep Anthony Walker on the field, that would have made a big difference in your run defense. You know what I mean? But all of those things went wrong. All of them went wrong in the same season. And even though I do think you do know what you're getting with Jadeveon Clowney, I don't know if they thought it was going to be that bad. Unless it was that bad last year and they just said, you know what, we're going to deal with it because we can get 8 sacks out of the guy or 7 sacks out of the guy. I don't know how you can put up with somebody taking themselves out of a football game and just refusing to play the game in a close division game that could have meant the difference between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. I mean, in fact, at that point, I know plenty of coaches in the NFL that would have cut him right there. Just cut him. So, I don't know that they anticipated that was going to be as bad as it was. But like you said, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. It was going to be, less than perfect. It was going to be less than perfect with Jadeveon Clowney. And then think about what we heard about Jordan Elliott in the offseason from Chris Kiffin, from Joe Woods, from everybody. I mean, people really thought that he was just going to knock it out of the park, right from the start. So, that was probably an over evaluation of what he was going to be capable of. So, they really need to take a look at that this year. And they also really need to listen to their new coordinator about these things and hear what he has to say about the talent that they have now. And he can't be afraid to really tell it like it is. That all of that has got to stop from everyone in this organization.
So I want to go back to the Jadeveon thing and the not going in on third downs and the way the Browns reacted. So we obviously put 2 and 2 together mid press conference and figured out like, oh, he didn't start the next game against Cincinnati and he sat out that series. And at the time we didn't have a good explanation for that.
Right.
We just kind of knew it was a punishment thing. Same thing happened to Miles. I guess, like, I mean, you know, you said, I mean, there's some coaches, there's some GMs at the minute that happens, like, you're gone. We're done. Like, this is over. And the Browns kind of, I don't know. I feel like that's sort of a soft punishment. Even when they did it to Miles, and I know they fined Miles too, it just feels like, you didn't want to play on third downs. You're just not going to you're just not going to play the first series this next week. I don't know. I don't know if that sends, I mean, it obviously didn't to Jadeveon. I don't know if that sends much of a message, honestly.
Bill Parcells would have cut him. I mean, Bill Belichick probably would have cut him, right? I mean, I just think that at that point, they were probably almost desperate for that number 2 edge. You can't go out in the middle of the season and find somebody that can give you that kind of production. And I think some of it was, okay, well, we know we have to put up with certain things from Jadeveon, but, you know, it will be worth it with the production that we get on the field. But I think that was so much obviously worse than anybody thought it was going to be. And I do think that truthfully, you need way more discipline than missing a start in your next game. You need that. That is not harsh enough whatsoever. It did basically nothing. So yeah, I don't know why they went so easy on him there. I don't understand it. And it was not the right way to go about that.
And you wonder what kind of message it sends to your locker room too. I mean, guys knew what he did, and the punishment is he gets benched for a series on Halloween. Obviously, Miles is different. I mean, you're not going to cut Miles. You're not going to, you know, that's a kind of a different discussion. But even that felt like sort of a soft-ish punishment for Miles if he's, you know, if it's something about communication or whatever. I don't know. I do just wonder with the JD thing, what kind of message that sends to some of the younger guys. Like we know Perion Winfrey needed to sort of be guided and have his hand held, and he actually was essentially suspended for a game. So what message does it send that Jadeveon only plays third downs in a game and just has to sit out a series?
Yeah, unfortunately for them, they didn't have anybody behind him that they could plug in and have him get to the quarterback. If they did, maybe they would have handled things differently. But at that point, I think they must have felt that they just were over a barrel with him. They had given him the money, you know, and they just felt obviously that maybe they just didn't have a choice. But that's certainly not enough of a punishment for that. And I do think it trickled down to the other players because after that, first of all, after that game is the game in which we had screaming players in the locker room. Okay. I don't know if Jadeveon was part of that or not. I was initially told that was members of the secondary that were screaming like that, and that Miles kind of broke that up. So I don't know if Jadeveon was part of that or not. I don't know. It would seem to make sense that would have had something to do with Jadeveon not playing in that game. Maybe the secondary players were yelling about that, right? I mean, we don't really know. So, so that's that. And then, you know, there were other disciplinary issues that occurred after that. Would those have occurred had Jadeveon not done what he did? You know what I mean? I mean, would guys have fallen in line more? I think so. I'm going to say yes on that right now. I think you follow your leaders on the team. And if your leader is disgruntled, then maybe you're going to be disgruntled. If your leader doesn't go in for a game, then maybe you can get away with it too. Maybe you know, if you don't like that, you don't get, I remember, who was it? There was a game. Oh, I'm not going to mention names, but there has been a player in the past that didn't go in the fourth quarter because they were like, forget it. I'm not doing that. That's happened on this team before. So if you see that you can do that and get away with it, or your star defensive player gets away with it, then you're going to try to pull something too. So they need to pull this all back together and have someone that's going to have a firm hand. Now, when I think about that, I think of a guy like Jim Schwartz. I mean, he would not put up with anything like that. There is no way that Jim Schwartz would put up with anything like that. He comes from the Bill Belichick school. I mean, he was here in Cleveland from 1993 to 1995, starting out as a pro scout. He learned the Belichick way. Brian Flores learned the Belichick way. These guys are not going to put up with this sort of thing. And I'll tell you that's what this defense needs. This defense needs a firm hand going forward.
Okay, that'll do it for part one of our Hey MK podcast here. Those questions came from our Football Insider subscribers, cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page to get info and get signed up for that. Part two is coming up. We've got some questions about personnel, a certain name that people want to know if the Browns might have an interest in, and some other things coming up in part two of the Hey Mary Kay podcast that I'll post probably about midday on Tuesday. So until then, Mary Kay, I'll talk to you later.
Sounds great.